second session today of our second day commemorating, honouring the 70th anniversary of D-Day. It's very much a product of our military history program here at OSU, as you will see. And one of the strengths of that program is that we combine civilian and military. We have a number of graduate students from the services who come and work with us. In other words, the people who make history, as well as those of us who just study history. And in the court system, it would sometimes happen I lectured on the 5th or the 6th of June. And I often teach evening seminars. It suits me and a number of those who also work, as well as study, found it good to have an evening session. And at the end of one session on the 5th of June 2009, I asked those who were in the seminar room in Dulles Hall to take a moment to think about their predecessors, more or less the same age. In teaching, it's the reverse of Peter Pan. The teacher gets older, but the children are always between 18 and 22. And I asked them to pause and think of those 18 to 22 years old, 70 years before, who had gone on not only the longest day, but for many of them their last day. And I had two interesting surprises. First of all, someone in the room came in afterwards to my office and said, "I'm so glad you said that. My father was in the first landing on D-Day on Omaha Beach, and I'm glad you mentioned him." And then I got an email from one of the military members of the class, a colonel. His name was Sean Judge. And he said, "I appreciated your sentiments. I was starting to choke up, as you were, because I was about to say, I remember also all the vets who have sat in this seminar room over the years since I came here in 1997, before that." And Sean said, "I was beginning to choke up too. No easy feat giving my training. In my youth, casualties seemed like numbers on a page. I was emotionally detached, not so anymore. With maturity comes a better understanding. I always include my comrades in harm's way when my family says grace before holiday meals to remind us all, as you did, that there are other things going on in the world. Anyway, as you pointed out, they were all so young. Those who didn't come through deserve the future that was stolen from them." It's in that spirit that I'd like to do two things before our speaker. First, I'd like to thank all the people without whom this event would never have happened. The OSU Office of University Development, University Advancement, University Communications, the faculty and staff, the Department of History, especially the Military History Program, and of course our many generous donors, all of you sitting before me now. Thank you all very, very much for your help. Thank you too to those who agreed to speak. William C. Murray last night, Peter Hahn just now, and today, second speaker, retired U.S. Army Colonel Peter Mansoor, distinguished graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, who then went on to serve 26 years in a variety of Army command and staff positions in the U.S., Europe, and the Middle East, culminating as executive officer to General David Petraeus, the commanding general of the multinational force Iraq. But Pete also sat in seminar room 168. He is an OSU doctor. He is a graduate student of Williamson Murray, who you heard last night. And in 2008, he returned here as the General Raymond E. Mason Jr. Chair of Military History. He writes and teaches at OSU on World War II, counterinsurgency, and modern counterinsurgency conflicts. His publications, The GI Offensive in Europe, Baghdad at Sunrise, and Surge, My Journey with General Petraeus and the Remaking of the Iraq War, will all be on sale this afternoon following the Veterans Panel. So please welcome now Dr. Peter Mansoor, who's going to talk to us about the longest day, the Allied invasion of Normandy.
I appreciate that kind introduction. And we have a lot, I'm going to lower this a little bit. We have a lot before us today. Is that good in the background? Okay. This is a variation of a lecture that I give to your sons and daughters who come through my World War II class on history of World War II. And I cover the invasion of Normandy in 80 minutes. You get the 60-minute version of it. And maybe a little bit longer since we don't need to break for lunch exactly at 11 in case we go a little bit over. How many of you have seen Saving Private Ryan? Okay, how many of you have not? A few. I thought a good way to start this talk off about the military history of the Normandy invasion is to show maybe 10 minutes of the scene of the U.S. Rangers landing on Omaha Beach on June 6th. For those of you who have not seen Saving Private Ryan, if you do not like violence, just close your eyes. And then I'll begin the lecture when the movie is concluded. think you get the idea. I, by the way, show that entire first 30 minutes to my students. With each passing year, more and more of them have not seen this movie, and those that have not are fairly astonished by the violence of combat. The question is, why did the landing on Omaha Beach occur in that manner? Because clearly the planners in England and the commanders of the U.S. forces didn't intend for landing craft to disgorge thousands of infantrymen and for them to be gunned down by German machine guns in fortifications that had not been touched. So that's what we're going to unpack today. Churchill understood as early as 1940 that the Allies would eventually have to return to the continent of Europe to liberate France and the other nations under the Nazi yoke. But he wanted the invasion to come after Nazi Germany had been weakened through subversion, aerial bombardment, and combat in peripheral theaters. As Dr. Hahn mentioned in his lecture, eventually at the Tehran conference, Roosevelt and Stalin prevailed on Churchill to schedule the landing of U.S. and British forces, Commonwealth troops, and French forces on into Northwest Europe in the spring of 1944. But before then, there were a number of attempts at getting forces onto the continent of Europe. Some commando raids, a large-scale one here in August 1942 at Dieppe, which is a port on the Pas-de-Calais in France. It was an Anglo-Canadian raid just to test out whether the Allies could seize a port in German-held France and what the requirements would be for a full-scale invasion. It was a disaster. The forces landed. They did not have air superiority, so German aircraft intervened. They landed right into an urban zone, which the Germans, with really a force of second-rate troops for the most part, were able to defend fairly easily. The Luftwaffe caused serious losses among landing craft and naval vessels, and after a number of hours, the forces were withdrawn and thousands were taken prisoner, and that was the end of the Dieppe raid. The defeat suggested to the planners that the Allies could not seize a port in the first days of an invasion, and that colored all of the invasion thinking from that point on, because if you can't seize a port, how are you going to land supplies and secure a beachhead and support forces ashore? And so there was a lot of thought put into that. And it also made clear to the Allies that they needed to obtain air superiority over the continent of Europe, over France at a minimum, in order to prevent Luftwaffe interference from the invasion, and to delay German reinforcements that might be heading to the invasion site. So this failure at Dieppe colored invasion planning from that point on. The planning itself began in the summer of 1943 under a staff group headed up by the Chief of Staff to the Allied Commander Designate. Of course, the Allied Commander of the invasion force had not yet been designated. This officer, British General Frederick Morgan, and his team came up with a draft plan, and in November 1943, several months later, the planners received approval for their initial design, which Winston Churchill, with an eye towards history, christened Operation Overlord. Often, operations are given code names that are sort of drawn out of the hat, something random, so it might not have any kind of meaning. But Churchill understood the invasion of Normandy would be of enormous strategic significance, and Overlord fit. The most important decision was where to invade. And there were a couple of considerations here. One, because of the importance of aircraft to the invasion and air superiority, The Allies wanted to land somewhere where single-engine fighters taking off from Great Britain could fly over the invasion area, have a significant amount of loiter time in order to bomb and strafe German forces, and then return to their bases in England. So it had to be close enough to England for that. It had to be near a port that could be opened up eventually to open up a lifeline, a logistical lifeline to the sea. And it had to be remote enough that the Allies could prevent German reinforcements from getting to the landing sites in a timely manner. So this is sort of a Goldilocks, mama bear, papa bear, baby bear situation. You want it close enough but not too close, with the right port facilities nearby. There were three possibilities in France. The Pas de Calais was the most obvious. Good landing beaches, lots of ports. Unfortunately, no way to segment it off from the rest of France, so the Germans could get reinforcements there pretty easily. And so the planners actually rejected the Pas de Calais as being the most obvious, but perhaps not the best solution. Brittany was another solution, but in fact, the American expeditionary forces in World War I used Brittany as their base of supply from the United States, so the Americans were sort of thinking in those terms. Fortunately, Brittany was a little bit too remote for aircraft to get there, flying from bases in England and have a significant amount of time over the invasion area before they'd have to return to refuel. And that left Normandy. And Normandy was accepted as sort of the Goldilocks solution for the invasion. It was remote enough to be isolated from enemy reinforcements and resupply. The port of Cherbourg on the Cotentin Peninsula was nearby. Allied forces could seize that and hopefully open it up for logistics purposes. And it was close enough to Great Britain to allow aircraft to operate effectively over the area. The next most important decision was when to invade. And I think Dr. Hahn covered this, why 1944, not 1943 or 42, in his previous lecture. And the specific date of the invasion was chosen by the big three at Tehran in November 1943 as being May 1944. And why did the invasion instead go in June? We'll talk about that in a moment. But the spring of 1944, there would be an invasion of Northwest Europe to help the Soviets out, who were suffering enormous casualties on the Eastern Front in that massive titanic struggle, the greatest land battle in the history of war. And regarding the specific date, there were several factors that the tactical planners considered. They wanted a full moon. This being the era before night vision devices, they wanted to land airborne troops at night. The troops couldn't see if there was no natural illumination. So they want a full moon so the troops could see at night, and so that the transport pilots could navigate and get the airborne forces to their drop zones. They wanted a low tide at dawn so that the beaches would be uncovered by water and you could see all the obstacles that the Germans had placed, but they wanted that tide to be rising so that as succeeding waves came in, theoretically they could land closer to shore, the obstacles having been destroyed by engineers in the first wave. That was the theory at any rate. And this set of conditions aligned only a few times each season. There was a date in May, the one after that was in early June, and the best date was June 5th, which was a Monday. The planners, because of Dieppe, put a lot of effort into figuring out how are we going to supply our forces over open beaches. The British actually came up with a solution of creating these vessels called landing ship tanks. You can see one right here with its bow doors open, which would be ocean-going transports, but then could actually land all the way up on a beach, open up their hull doors, and vehicles could actually drive off the transport ship onto the beach itself. The But there was a worldwide shortage of these types of vessels, landing ship tanks or LSTs. The demands of the Pacific War sucked up a lot of transport capacity, a lot of the landing craft. Only in 1944 did the Allies dispose of sufficient landing craft to make an invasion of Northwest Europe possible. Again, for those of you who went to the lecture yesterday, Wick Murray talked about the Victory program in the United States and how basically a couple of economists told the Army's chiefs of supply, we can fulfill the terms of the requirements for the Victory program, but not until the spring of 1944. And so landing in 43 just wasn't in the cards unless the British acquiesced, because most of the forces would have had to have been British, and Churchill wasn't going to do that. But by the spring of 1944, there would be enough landing craft to invade. And to show you how tight that timeline was, most of the landing craft used in the Normandy invasion were built in the 6 months prior to D-Day. So this was how enormous the industrial effort was. The LSTs were so important to the enterprise that Churchill had this to say about them. He said, 1,000 years from now, historians will wonder how the destinies of two great empires would be tied up in some goddamn things called LSTs. For the Normandy invasion, also, the Allies came up with an ingenious industrial solution to lack of a port. That is, they would just build one. These were known as mulberry harbors, made out of concrete and ships that would be towed over to the opposite shore, across the channel. Their cocks open, filled with seawater, and they'd sink to the bottom of the channel. They would form a natural breakwater, which is, after all, what a port is, an area of calm water inside, protected from the channel. And then you'd have caissons and piers and landing facilities on which ships could then dock, and then, in this case, a tank is driving off onto this artificial port. Ingenious solution, one that was only partly successful for reasons that we'll soon see. Logistical planning for Normandy, however, rested on a belief that the advance, once the forces were ashore, would be a very methodical, day-by-day, linear advance. And because it wasn't, the logistical planning for Normandy was inadequate. And that's a topic for a different lecture. If you were in my class, it would be the next day, or the next lesson, where we talk about the Normandy campaign. But in essence, the D-Day document, the planning document, was a logistical document. How do we get forces ashore? How do we sustain them once they get there? But to get ashore, the Allies first had to breach what was known as the Atlantic Wall. The overall commander in the West was Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the same German leader that led German forces to victory in France in 1940. His primary subordinate in Army Group B, which was responsible for this area of the Channel Coast here in northern France, was none other than Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, one of the best tactical commanders in World War II. These two, however, disagreed, Rommel and Rundstedt, on how to defend France. I'm only going to cover this very briefly because Dr. Russell Hart, one of our products here, and actually a fellow graduate student in the early 90s with me, will cover the German side of D-Day this afternoon. They disagreed on where to put the armored forces. Rundstedt wanted them concentrated near Paris so he could launch a large armored counterattack once the Allies landed. Of course, his vision is colored by his experiences in 1940, when the Germans had air superiority, or at least air parity. Rommel, having suffered through the Battle of El Alamein, realized that when the Allies have air superiority, you better have the forces close to where they're going to fight, because they're going to be attrited along the way. So he wanted the armor right up on the beaches. Hitler, in his usual way, split the difference. Gave Rommel some of the divisions, kept some of them back near Paris, and it was Hitler's usual way of slicing and dicing between his commander's desires to keep them all dependent on him. Rommel, instead, threw himself, you can see him here leading an inspection team, threw himself into the task of building the Atlantic Wall. And in the months leading up to the Normandy invasion, German engineers put real teeth into the defenses. They laid millions of mines, built concrete and steel fortified bunkers, installed beach defense obstacles. Rommel asparagus was telephone poles sunk into the ground with barbed wire strung between them, made it difficult for gliders to land. Gliders were one of the primary means of getting air landing forces into their drop zones in World War II. So that was the challenge that the Allies faced, how to overcome landing on a beach that looks like this. Most of those obstacles being topped with mines as well. The Allies decided one of the things that they should do at the strategic level is convince the Germans that they were going to land somewhere other than where they were going to land. This was the most successful deception operation in the history of war, at least one of the most successful. And it was known as Operation Bodyguard. It was divided into several elements. Operation Fortitude North would be trying to convince the Germans that the Allies would land in Norway. Well, you go, wow, we would not have landed in Norway. That sounds fantastic. Actually, Churchill wanted to land in Norway. It was part of his peripheral strategy, operations in the Mediterranean, operations in Scandinavia, operations anywhere other than facing the heart of the German army in France until the last possible minute. Fortitude South would make the Germans believe that the Allies would instead land in the Pas-de-Calais, the most likely avenue of invasion. And so, if you know anything about military deception, to make it successful, what you want to do is convince the enemy of something that he believes anyway. And this was the whole idea behind Operation Fortitude South. And these deception operations included a number of very ingenious things. They created fake equipment parks. It looks like a Sherman tank. It's actually made of rubber. And they had these parks located very prominently throughout the southeast area of England, so that any German planes flying over, reconnaissance aircraft, could take nice pictures of all these tanks lined up in ports that would support an invasion of the Pas-de-Calais. They had actually radio operators who were, operating fake radio stations, real radio equipment, but representing units that didn't exist. They came up with patches of all sorts of units grouped together under what they called the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, led by the best operational commander in the Allied repertoire, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., who of course was not going to lead U.S. forces in the Normandy landing because of the slapping incident of 2 soldiers in Sicily. But the Germans couldn't believe that the Americans would sideline their best commander just because he slapped a couple of soldiers. The German army, of course, was de rigueur to shoot soldiers. So they had controlled leaks of information through diplomatic channels. Ambassadors in various neutral countries, Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, where they could rub elbows with others at cocktail parties, would mention things that would then get passed on to the German intelligence. The most successful of the various schemes, however, was the use of German agents who had been turned by British intelligence and had become double agents. The British counterintelligence was so successful by 1944 that there was not a single German agent operating in Britain who had not been turned into a double agent. Some of them executed, many of them, though, simply put in prison, and they would have their Abwehr German intelligence provided radio set with them there in prison, and they'd have a British handler right there feeding them what to say. And this was highly successful. One memorable piece of deception occurred just 3 days before D-Day. It's a crowded hotel room in the Ritz in London. There was a big reception going on, and Patton spies Eisenhower across the room, and he goes, "Ike, I'll see you in Calais." Calais being a port on the Pas-de-Calais. Everyone in the room's like, "Oh no, Patton has just given up the information of where we're going to land." Of course, it was a planted piece of information. Patton was told to do that. But of all the means used, the most effective was the use of double agents. And this was aided by the fact that we cracked the German Enigma codes, and we could actually see if the Germans bought what these double agents were feeding German intelligence. And in fact, they were. The story of one of these double agents, Garbo, is, I think, so good that I've got to tell it to you. He was a Spanish anti-fascist who ingratiated himself with German intelligence by sending fabricated reports on supposed British activities from Lisbon, Portugal. He became a German agent, and after ingratiating himself with the Germans, he then offered his services to the British. And they checked his bona fides, whether he was who he claimed he was and whether he had an impact on German intelligence, through the use of ultra-intelligence. They figured out, yes, the Germans actually believed what he was giving them. And so the British brought Garbo to the United Kingdom and then created for him a fictitious network of 30 sub-agents who were supposedly working for him and providing him intelligence. In fact, to make it realistic, one of the agents was hit by a car and died, at which point the Abwehr sent condolences to Garbo for the death of one of his agents. The British had Garbo send very accurate information on, for instance, on the torch landings in North Africa, but too late for the Germans to actually act on the information. But it was realistic enough that the Germans bought it. This all led to the coup de grace. 3 days after the Normandy landings, Garbo sends a message to the Abwehr saying, "Never mind Normandy, it's just a subsidiary operation. The Allies want you to pour all your reinforcements into Normandy. They're really going to land on the Pas-de-Calais with Patton and the Fusag later on." And the message reinforced what the Germans already believed and kept alive the deception that non-existent units would at some time land at a point in the Pas-de-Calais according to a non-existent invasion plan. The Germans were so delighted with Garbo's work that they awarded him the Iron Cross First Class. Fortitude was enormously important in the success of the Normandy invasion, perhaps not on D-Day itself, but in the campaign. It kept the 15th Army tied to the Pas-de-Calais for so long that, in fact, for long enough that the decision in Normandy had been reached beyond a doubt before the 15th Army unhinged itself from its beach defenses for an invasion that never came. I think Dr. Murray talked about this at length yesterday, so I won't talk about it at length. But the invasion of Normandy would never have been successful had we not gained air superiority over the continent of Europe beforehand. And this occurred just in the last 3 months prior to D-Day, with massive air battles over the skies of the Third Reich. And the real hero of these battles was the P-51 Mustang, the best single-engine fighter of World War II. Great story. For those of you who are over 60, you can always sign up for my World War II class for free, and you'll hear the story of how the P-51 came into existence. Fascinating tale. And again, just serendipity, luck, and chance that it appeared in great numbers in January 1944 right when the air battles in Europe were going against the 8th Air Force because of its lack of a long-range escort fighter to escort its bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But in fact, the P-51 does appear, and the massive air battles do occur. So by June of '44, when the Normandy invasion occurs, the German, whatever German fighter strength is in France has mostly been pulled back to the homeland to defend the homeland. And the German fighter force, in fact, had cracked. Most of its pilots having been killed, and most of the pilots has plenty of planes because of the German economy is still pumping out lots of fighter planes, although of dubious quality. But the pilots lack more than a few hours of flying time, and in fact are not a threat to intervene in Normandy. Over 3,700 Allied fighters protected the invasion beaches on D-Day. I think it's a telling statistic that the Germans were able to launch fewer than 100 sorties against all the invasion beaches combined on that day. The other preparation for Operation Overlord was a transportation plan. And this was the brainchild of a very quirky scientist, Solly Zuckerman, a 39-year-old South African-born Oxford professor of zoology, who Bomber Harris, the head of British Bomber Command, used to say, "Why should I listen to anyone who studies the sexual mating habits of apes?" In fact, Zuckerman used the new social science theories to figure out that if you could stop German reinforcements from flowing to the beaches, the best way to do that, the German army being mostly Actually, it's neither of these. Turn them all off, that's still going on. Gremlins. All right, use my teaching voice. Can you hear me in the back?
Yes.
All right. So what Zuckerman figured out is that if you destroy the rail system, the Germans can't get their units to the beaches in a timely manner. The German army had a veneer of mechanization, but most of its units were still infantry marching on foot with horse and wagon logistics, even in 1944. So how do you prevent the Germans from using rail? If you destroy the rails, they simply rebuild them. But if you destroy the marshalling yards, then you can really put a dent in the capacity of the Germans to reinforce their forces in Normandy. The problem is the marshalling yards are mostly in the center of French cities. And to hit them, you're going to destroy or kill tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Frenchmen in the process. The Allied Supreme Commander for the Normandy invasion, Dwight Eisenhower, agreed with Zuckerman's analysis, and he sought direction over the heavy bombers of the Allied air fleets in the month or two leading up to the invasion in order to put his transportation plan into effect.
The bomber barons, the heads of the British Bomber Command, Air Marshal Harris, and the head of the US 8th Air Force and the Air Forces in Europe, Ira Eaker, and others, disagreed. They wanted their air fleets to continue bombing German industry, the oil facilities, German cities. The airmen felt that they could finish the war that way, and that diversion of heavy bombers to the invasion was not conducive to the best use of these resources. Eisenhower was so adamant that he, on March 22nd, 1944, this is now 2 months before the invasion, 2.5 months before the invasion, said, if a satisfactory agreement were not reached to allow him to use the bombers, that he would take drastic action and inform the combined chiefs of staff that unless the matter is settled at once, I will request relief from this command. Now, this is the only issue that Eisenhower threatened to resign over in the months leading up to D-Day. And the combined chiefs of staff sided with Eisenhower, and he got the bombers. But before that, you had to overcome political resistance from Churchill. Churchill thought that risking so many French lives to Allied bombing would conceivably drive post-war France into the arms of the Soviet Union. Eventually, it was the Free French leaders, Charles de Gaulle and others, who settled the matter. Eisenhower took the matter to them, and de Gaulle said, if killing Frenchmen is what it takes to liberate France, then kill Frenchmen. And they did. But only in tens of thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands that they thought might occur. Eisenhower wrote this to Churchill over the transportation plan. We must never forget that one of the fundamental factors leading to the decision for undertaking Overlord was the conviction that our overpowering Air Force would make feasible an operation which might otherwise be considered extremely hazardous, if not foolhardy. When Churchill wavered again, Roosevelt backed Eisenhower, and the issue was resolved. I'm going to try this microphone one more time, so I don't lose my voice. Okay, let's see if that works. The transportation plan was enormously successful. I won't give you all the statistics, but the Germans had to pull 18,000 workers off the construction of Atlantic Wall defenses to put them to work repairing marshalling yards and railways. By D-Day, the French rail network was operating at just 10% of its capacity. And Normandy was, for all intents and purposes, strategically isolated from the rest of France. And this accomplishment allowed the Allies and the invasion of Normandy to succeed. The German army operated in Normandy without sufficient quantities of armor, artillery, ammunition, and fuel. And what reinforcements they did send to Normandy had to make the road march at night, very short nights, because this is Northern Europe in the summer where there's only about 5 hours of darkness. And it took the German forces a lengthy time to actually reinforce their forces in Normandy. The victors in the Mediterranean, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower, were brought from the Mediterranean to England in late 1943 and early 44 to begin planning, to look at the plan that Frederick Morgan and his staff had developed. Montgomery immediately realized that landing 3 divisions backed by 1 airborne division was insufficient. Eisenhower backed Montgomery, and together they mandated that the Allies would land 5 seaborne divisions, really 6, because there was 2 that were landed on Omaha Beach, and 3 airborne divisions on D-Day. So 9 divisions total, a significant increase. But the Allies didn't have enough landing craft for all these forces, so they had to delay the operation by a month. That's why D-Day occurs in June and not in May, which is what the Big Three decided on in Tehran. The Allies would land on 5 beaches, from east to west: Sword, Juno, Gold, Omaha, and Utah. The British would land on Sword and Gold, the Canadians at Juno, and the Americans at Utah and Omaha. 2 airborne divisions, the 82nd and 101st, would land behind Utah Beach to support the landings there, and 1 British airborne division, the 6th, would land on the eastern flank of the invasion area to protect it against German counterattacks. Now, Dr. Murray told the story yesterday. I'm going to retell it because I know some of you weren't there, because I think it shows, perhaps I'm going to take the varnish off some of your heroes of D-Day, one of them being Omar Bradley. In the months leading up to D-Day, General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, thought it was really important to transfer some of the lessons learned from the amphibious invasions in the Pacific theater to Europe. And so he took the division commander of the 7th Infantry Division, Charles P. Corlett, who had just in February of '44 landed on Kwajalein, which was an enormously successful invasion. The 7th Division takes the island with minimal casualties. The Japanese are destroyed. The American forces clearly learned the lessons of the disaster at Tarawa a few months earlier. Marshall is so impressed that he tells Corlett, I want you to go to London and help them with their invasion planning. In London, Corlett is viewed as the guy coming in from another theater to grade their homework. And he's shunted aside. Bradley basically tells him, we have nothing to learn from the Pacific. We've been doing amphibious invasions here since before you. In November '42 with Operation Torch, we've landed in Sicily, Italy. This is our 4th, in Anzio. This is our 5th amphibious invasion in theater. We have nothing to learn from a Bush League theater like the Pacific. And he completely ignores his advice. Now, what Bradley would have learned had he listened to Corlett is that in invading a beach that's heavily defended, as the Japanese did, you needed massive amounts of firepower, and you needed a bombardment that was going to extend for a lengthy period of time. Furthermore, that the beach defenses, especially ones with coconut log bunkers in the Pacific or reinforced concrete in the Atlantic, couldn't be overcome unless they were hit very precisely. That saturation fire would not work. But that saturation fire is exactly what the Allies planned for the Normandy beaches. One observer, in referring to the invasion of Kwajalein, said after the pre-invasion bombardment, it looked like the island had been picked up 20,000 feet and then dropped. And that was what Corlett was aiming to do in Normandy, and that was exactly what was not done, leading to the kind of scene that we saw at the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. The weather didn't cooperate. After excellent weather in May, storms blew in. The troops got on their ships, went out to sea on the 4th of June, but clearly they could not land on the 5th of June as intended. The seas were far too rough, and the ships had to come back to port. So now the troops are on board for 24 hours, seasick, almost all of them seasick, and things look pretty iffy. The worst weather in 20 years had just descended on the Channel Coast. Rommel was so convinced that the Allies wouldn't invade in that bad weather that he left France to Germany to attend a celebration of his wife's birthday. And most of the Corps and Division commanders then went to a war game in a city, Ron, and were away from their command posts on D-Day. The Allies, however, had an advantage over the Germans, and that is we controlled the Atlantic. And so the Allies had weather stations and weather ships in the Atlantic, where the German weather ships had all been taken off the high seas because of we knew where they were because of Ultra. Because we were reading the German codes, we could destroy all their weather trawlers and take them, capture them, which we did. And what these weather stations reported is that there was a period of rising pressure that was going to descend, come in behind the storm, and that would enable a very unexpected but very narrow window of opportunity for landing on June 6th. Here's the actual weather map that this guy, Group Captain James Stagg, Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, showed him at 4:15 a.m. on the morning of June 5th with rain pouring down outside Suffolk House, all the commanders there at the table. And he gets this briefing from the meteorologist. Well, he goes around the table, who's for going on the next day, June 6th, who's for not going. Montgomery said we should go. And Eisenhower ends the conference by saying, the question is, how long can you hang this operation on the end of a limb and let it hang there? I'm quite positive we must give the order. I don't like it, but there it is. I don't see how we can possibly do anything else. Okay, we'll go. And with that, the meeting broke up. Everyone went back to the headquarters. The ships went back out to sea and got ready for the invasion. Eisenhower, to show you what kind of leader he was, penned a note at that point saying it was a draft press release in case the invasion failed because of the weather. He said, the decision to go was mine alone. The fault for the failure of the invasion is mine alone. Puts it in his pocket. And then he mistakenly dates it July 6, 1944, instead of June 6. But in fact, it shows, the kind of lead. He wasn't going to make excuses. He was just going to say, it was my decision, my blame. As it turns out, the decision was really inspired, although it discouraged hundreds of thousands of seasick troopers onto the beaches of Normandy, and they had real problems with the rough seas. In fact, the Germans were also not at their best because of the weather. And the next period of where all those conditions aligned, full moon, rising tide at dawn, well, that was June 19th through 21st. And that period just happened to coincide with the most ferocious channel storm in more than a century. So Eisenhower made the right decision. As dust settled over the airfields in England on the night of June 5th, paratroopers from 3 airborne divisions got ready to go. You can see some of them from the 101st right there. The first Pathfinders were down in France before midnight. These were, they had special landing lights and radio communications. They intended to drop into the landing zone so that they could beacon the other transport aircraft to the right place. In fact, some of them were wildly off the mark and failed to mark the proper drop zones. On the eastern flank of the invasion, probably the most effective airborne landing was the British 6th Airborne. It had the mission of sealing off the eastern flank of the beachhead, capturing and destroying bridges over the Orne River and the Orne River Canal, and thereby make it very difficult for German armor to counterattack from the direction of Paris. The most famous achievement was at this little bridge, Pegasus Bridge, where a group from, led by Major John Howard, carried in 6 horse gliders, landed. And you can see what a horse glider looks like right there. They had been preparing for a year for this tactical mission. They had found places in England that kind of looked like the area in France that they were going to land in. Howard's intention was to land in his glider and finish such that the nose of his glider penetrated the German barbed wire surrounding the bridge, and have the others land behind him, and then they'd overtake the garrison. And in fact, only 3 of the 6 gliders actually made it to the spot, but his glider landed with the nose of the glider penetrating the wire. And this is in the era without GPS, without night vision goggles. These guys were good.
If you ever go to Pegasus Bridge, which we take the students to Pegasus Bridge, we take our Friends of History tour to Pegasus Bridge, you'll see statues where each of the gliders landed, one behind the other. There's a nice statue of John Howard there as well. So they took Pegasus Bridge and then were reinforced on the afternoon of D-Day by Lord Lovett's commandos arriving from Sword Beach. And Pegasus Bridge remained in British hands, and they were able to seal off the eastern flank of the beachhead. The main force of British paratroopers, however, was widely scattered, just like the Americans were further to the west. The British paratroopers nevertheless accomplished all their missions in really heroic and spectacular fashion. Perhaps the most difficult of these was the destruction of a German gun battery at Merville. Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway and his forces were tasked to destroy this gun battery, and if they didn't, at 5 a.m., the HMS Arethusa would open fire and attempt to knock it out with sea fire, with naval gunfire. Otway's men were badly scattered in the drop. He dropped in with 750. By 3 a.m. in the morning, this is 2 hours before the naval guns are going to open up, he has 150 guys left. That's all he can collect. Nevertheless, he reached the gun battery and attacked it in a very courageous battle. The paratroopers destroyed the German garrison, destroyed the guns, while sustaining about 50% losses. 66 men killed, 30 wounded out of 150 that attacked. And just before 5 a.m., when the naval ships are going to open fire, they send up the success signal, and they call off the naval gunfire, which would have killed him and all his men. These are, you talk about, the Normandy landings, really balance on the knife edge. This is a good example of that. Over western Normandy, a low bank of clouds obscured the ground from the transport pilots. A lot of the pathfinders didn't get to their drop zones. And German flak, anti-aircraft fire, forces the transport pilots to bob and weave trying to evade it. And so the American paratroopers are landed all over the Katetin Peninsula. Only a fraction of them actually get to their objectives on D-Day. But they actually accomplished their mission of protecting the western end of the causeways leading off Utah Beach, and thereby enabling forces from Utah Beach to get inland. And also, the scattered nature of the drop really confuses the Germans. Maybe we'll hear more about that this afternoon. To the extent that the Germans are going hither and yon, chasing down paratroopers everywhere, instead of focusing on the main event, which is the landings. The airborne troops had done their job, and it remained to be seen on about 6 in the morning on June 6th whether the seaborne forces could do theirs. The key objective in the British zone of operations were the city of Caen, where all the roads converged in Normandy, major communications hub, and then an airfield, the Copperket Aerodrome nearby. The landings of the British 3rd Division on Sword Beach, easternmost beach, were very successful. German resistance was fairly weak. Within 45 minutes, the soldiers had seized the beach area and had begun attacking inland. Of note, the only German counterattack of major import came into this area on D-Day. 21st Panzer Division in the afternoon actually got some tanks all the way to the coast, but they weren't able to eject the British from the beachhead until they were eventually repelled by fighter bombers, naval gunfire, and ground forces. The opposition, however, did prevent the 3rd Division from getting to the city of Caen, major D-Day objective. And in fact, Caen would not fall to British forces for another 6 weeks. The 3rd Canadian Division, which landed at Juno Beach, was also successful. It encountered heavier resistance from the German 716th Division. The preliminary bombardment proved ineffective. Rough weather impeded landing operations, and several assault companies took heavy casualties, but coordinated fire support from artillery and armor, which made it ashore, cleared most of the coastal defenses within 2 hours of landing. A big difference between Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, and in this case, Juneau Beach. You can see how the built-up area goes right over to the water's edge in that area. So they had an urban battle immediately upon landing. The subsequent push of the Canadian forces inland had distinctly mixed results. Because it's a rising tide at dawn, remember? You get all this men and all these vehicles crammed into this narrow area between the surf and the beach. You only have so many roads that go through this urban area, and it caused massive traffic jams. Nevertheless, even though Canadians didn't reach their D-Day objectives either, the Canadians had succeeded in pushing inland further inland than any other landing force on D-Day. On Gold Beach, British naval commanders made a very brave decision. They said they were launching the amphibious tanks, the duplex drive, DD tanks into the surf. And they go, boys, surf's a little high today. We're going to cart you all the way to the beach in our landing craft. Thereby, the landing craft could be brought under fire, so they're risking themselves too. That decision saved all the tanks from swamping in the channel. Another reason why the British landings were so successful, they had most of the armor they wanted to get ashore, got ashore. Unlike Omaha Beach, where 5 tanks out of 36 get to the shore. Everything else drowns. The other thing that helped here was a very interesting unit known as the 79th Armored Division, Overlord's Funnies. This was a very innovative armor commander who created all sorts of specialty vehicles. The Sherman flail tank, which could make paths and minefields, the Churchill crocodile flamethrower tank, other tanks that could lay fascines or material to breach ditches, bridge-laying tanks, all of these sorts of interesting vehicles which were enormously useful to the British on D-Day and in the Normandy campaign. So here's Omar Bradley again. British say, do you want any of these vehicles? Bradley's like, no thanks, we're good. And so Omaha Beach, they have none of that stuff. They do take the Sherman flail tank, none of the others. At midnight on June 6th, when the day is over, the British 50th Division on Gold Beach had landed 25,000 men while sustaining only 400 casualties. It had penetrated 6 miles inland, linked up with the Canadians, and the next day they took the city of Bayou intact, thankfully so that we can stay there when we go there for our tours now and have this wonderful medieval city that has never been touched by battle. Still has all its charm. British engineers soon went to work at a place called Airborne on constructing the Mulberry Harbor, which they soon nicknamed Port Winston. I know I'm going over, but that's okay, because you don't need lunch anyway. Utah Beach was the most successful of any of the beaches, amphibious invasions on any of the beaches. You don't hear about it because Omaha Beach is so traumatic. But actually, everything that goes wrong on Omaha goes right on Utah. For one thing, the air support was effective. And just by chance, because Omaha Beach was more important, they decided to put all the heavy bombers into the support of Omaha Beach, and they gave Utah Beach the medium bombers, which was actually to their advantage, because the medium bombers came in under the cloud cover, because they were more nimble, and were able to precisely target the resistance nests of the Germans and destroy them. Exactly what Corlett wanted. Here's a B-26 bomber, the Widowmaker, it was known as, because it was so difficult to fly, so many crashed. The pilots learning to fly it didn't have a high survival rate. But it was very effective once they did learn how to use it. And the Widowmakers that came in on Utah Beach wrecked the key German fortifications overlooking the landing beaches. And
and this enabled the invasion to succeed without a huge number of casualties. The landing craft heading towards shore now, because of the effects of the Channel storm, veered off course. There was a huge riptide in the area, and they landed south of where they wanted to land. Once on the beach, some very inspired leadership by Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt, the son of President Teddy Roosevelt, and a distant cousin of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, quickly realized that he was in the wrong place, and the Allied forces were in the wrong place. And Roosevelt is there almost by chance. He had been a leader in the 1st Division, Infantry Division in the Mediterranean, had been relieved of his position by, yes, Omar Bradley, and sent to Britain. He was given another chance as Assistant Division Commander of the 4th Division. No one wanted him to go in on D-Day. They didn't want to risk the son of the president being killed, and he demanded to be included in the invasion, as all of the other Assistant Division Commanders were included in the invasion, and all of them were enormously important. Their leadership on the beaches, almost all of them earned Distinguished Service Crosses. Roosevelt himself earned the Medal of Honor. He is a great scene. They're getting ready for the invasion, and Omar Bradley is up there energizing the troops. Very difficult, because Omar Bradley had the personality of a pancake. You should come to the Normandy with me. You'll get a whole dose of Omar Bradley. So Bradley's there, and he's going, "Gentlemen," talking to the troops, "you are about to be, you're about to have a grandstand seat for the greatest show on earth." And amid the troops, sitting among them, Roosevelt barks down with his gravelly voice, "God damn it, we're not going to be in the bleachers, we're down on the gridiron." And Bradley's all flustered and sort of walks away. Once ashore on the gridiron in France, Roosevelt decided not to re-embark his troops to get to the right landing beach, but instead to begin fighting. "We'll begin the war from here," he barked, and indeed they did. The troops of the 4th Infantry Division quickly overcame the remaining German resistance on the beach and advanced inland to link up with the Screaming Eagles of the 101st Airborne Division and the All-American Division, the 82nd Airborne, on the other side of the causeways leading to the Catetan Peninsula. Like I mentioned, for his leadership on D-Day, Marshall and Roosevelt would award the other Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., with the Medal of Honor. He died a few days later of a heart attack and is now buried next to his brother Quentin in the American Military Cemetery in Normandy. Quentin actually died in World War I. He was a flyer, and they're buried together. Quentin is the only non-World War II vet buried there at Colville-sur-Mer. This is our World War II study abroad group last year on the sands of Utah Beach, and showing the flag of the university, planting it in the sands there. Wonderful opportunity for up to 20 students every year to study abroad, and of course you all have an enormously important role in supporting them when you contribute to the department, and especially the fund that supports this study abroad program. Pointe du Hoc, another iconic scene from D-Day. It lies between Utah and Omaha Beach. The Germans had 6 howitzers located in gun positions. You can see one of them here on Pointe du Hoc, and they could endanger either of the beaches if they weren't captured or destroyed. As you can see, medium bombers came and tried to destroy them. This is what saturation bombardment does, right? You just drop a bunch of bombs and you hope you hit. Guess how many of the 6 howitzers were destroyed by saturation bombardment? 0. And so the 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions were tasked to climb the cliffs on D-Day and destroy them. Only 3 of the companies actually made it to Pointe du Hoc. The others veered off course and ended up on Omaha Beach. That's why you've seen in Saving Private Ryan, you have Rangers on the beach, on Omaha Beach. They're not intended to be there. It's
serendipity, because they actually lead the way off of Omaha Beach in one of the zones. The other three companies do land. They scale the cliffs using grappling hooks and ropes and ladders. You can see some of them here. And get to the top only to find the guns aren't there. But they know they have a mission, so they send out patrols. The patrols actually find the guns. Interestingly enough, the German artillerymen are lined up at the mess hall waiting breakfast, leaving the guns completely unguarded. And this patrol uses thermite grenades to destroy them and then gets back to Point du Hoc. The Rangers suffer enormously, though, because they're there for 2 days without reinforcement, massive German counterattacks trying to wipe them out, and the force of 225 Rangers that lands was reduced to just about 90 men by the end of those 2 days until they were relieved by reinforcements coming from Omaha Beach. A great quote from Ronald Reagan here, which is now encased in bronze on a plaque at Point du Hoc. Soon, one by one, the Rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe.
Is that the 84?
Yes, I'm sorry. 40th anniversary. If everything went right on Utah Beach, almost nothing goes right on Omaha Beach. The bombers go in, they're supposed to bomb the beach. Well, it's cloudy that day. They can't see the landmarks, and so they're using a time distance calculation, basically looking at the wristwatch. They're going to drop the bombs when they're over the beach by a time distance calculation. That's very inaccurate. And even then, they delay the release by a few seconds because they don't want to hit their own ships in the channel. And this means that all the bombs dropped on Omaha Beach, not one hits the beach. They all land inland, killing lots of Norman cows. And the heavy bombardment was anything but. The USS Nevada, one of the Pearl Harbor survivors, now refloated and sent to the Atlantic. It's the only battleship used in the bombardment. By way of comparison, contemporaneous with the invasion of Normandy is the invasion of Saipan in the Pacific. 6 heavy battleships tasked to bombard those beaches, and for a very lengthy shore bombardment as well. This one, they only get about an hour and a half at most of bombardment, and very light weapons floating ashore or floating in the channel. And as a result, Corlett's prediction comes to pass. The naval shore bombardment was too limited, and the air bombardment was too inaccurate, and the German defenses remained intact. Not largely intact, intact. And that's why you lead to the scene in Saving Private Ryan, where a lot of body bags are being filled because of commanders' decisions back in England. Nevertheless, the weary and seasick troopers headed to shore through the very rough seas. The amphibious tanks that were designed to support them, most of them flounder in the channel, drowning the crews. Only 5 get to the beach. And the Germans put up extremely stiff resistance. One company in the 116th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division, it's Virginia National Guard, it lands right where it's supposed to land, in front of the Deerville Draw. 196 out of 200 men in the company killed or wounded. And that's the scene from Saving Private Ryan that they're showing you, where the machine guns are mowing down people in great numbers. Interestingly enough, the National D-Day Memorial is now located in Bedford, Virginia, where a very small town lost 8 of their sons on that day. Very catastrophic loss for such a small community. The carefully prepared plan for the invasion of Omaha Beach was in danger of failing. And Omar Bradley actually considered landing succeeding waves at Utah Beach, which would have probably been the failure of the invasion, because Omaha connects the British beaches with Utah Beach. The situation was rescued by lower level commanders and small unit leaders. Several destroyer captains saw the difficulties the troops were having ashore, sailed their destroyers in all the way into the beach, had them risk of beaching them in this shallow water in order to support with direct fire from their own observation troops ashore, taking the German fortifications under fire with their deck guns. And the other was small unit leaders, infantry commanders, who found gaps in the German defenses and were able to lead their small forces up the bluffs between the draws, between the heavily defended areas where the Germans were. As troops piled up on the beach, in scenes such as this right here, the commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment and the 1st Infantry Division, Colonel George Taylor, exclaimed, two kinds of people are staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here. The Assistant Division Commander of the 29th Infantry Division, Brigadier General Norm Cota, walked the beach upright and seemingly oblivious to enemy fire. Came upon one group, could have been Tom Hanks' group, right? 5th Ranger. He goes, who the hell are you? Right? And they go, we're Rangers, sir. And he looks down at him and he goes, God damn it, if you're Rangers, get up and lead the way off this beach. And they did. And since then, Rangers lead the way has been the motto of the U.S. Rangers, coming from D-Day. And small unit leaders like Captain Joe Dawson, commander of the G Company, 16th Infantry, and 2nd Lieutenant John Spaulding, the leader of 2nd Platoon E Company, 16th Infantry. Land, by a miraculous turn of events, none of their men are killed in the invasion. They land between fortifications. They figure out paths up, leading off the beach, and they attack the German fortifications from behind, thereby creating a gap in the German fortifications through which 5 regiments poured on the afternoon of D-Day. If you want to know where that is, and you go to Normandy, it's right below where the cemetery is located today. So, very good reason why the cemetery is there. Cota himself climbed with his troops to the top of the bluff and continued to organize attacks to open up the beach exits from behind. The troops recalled one encounter where this infantry company is trundling up. Cota is going the other way. He's going, twirling his .45 caliber pistol around his finger, going, "Where the hell you been, boys?" And one soldier remembers in his walk up the bluffs, "I walked slowly, dragging my unwilling soul with me." In fact, bloody Omaha cost the Americans 2,500 casualties, twice the body count from the Marine invasion of Tarawa 6 months earlier. And this is another group, friends of the History Department, in our tour of Omaha Beach in July 2011, again planting the flag. I'll conclude with the cost. Good news is on D-Day, the Allies landed 155,000 men ashore on beachheads in Normandy. The Allies had needed only a half a day to penetrate the Atlantic Wall that Hitler and his legions had taken 4 years to build. They would now pour reinforcements ashore and expand the lodgement area, and it remained to be seen whether they could break out of Normandy to liberate France and knock Germany out of the war. The 8th Assault Divisions had suffered 12,000 casualties in all, with 2/3 of those suffered by American forces, a down payment on the 500,000 American men who would be killed or wounded in Europe. Those of you who were at the lecture yesterday, some of you asked about the headstones in Normandy, so I've added this overnight. This is the British Commonwealth Cemetery in Bayeux. You can see the different ways that different nations memorialize their dead. This is the German cemetery, La Camp, very somber, very Teutonic. This is the American military cemetery. This is obviously an unknown soldier. It says, "Here rests in honor and glory a comrade in arms known but to God." The Medal of Honor winners are indicated with gold lettering, so Roosevelt and a couple others. And other notables, like the Nealon brothers, for whom Saving Private Ryan is modeled after, are there, and they're not in gold, but they put sand in them so they stand out. They actually had to rope that area off because after Saving Private Ryan came out, all of a sudden there was thousands and thousands of people who wanted to see the Nealon brothers and their graves there in Normandy. The British allow families to put a small quote on the bottom of their tombstones. And this is one that caught my eye, so I took a picture of it. "Into the mosaic of victory, our most precious piece is laid." I'm going to conclude with a passage from Rick Atkinson's History of the Liberation of Western Europe, Guns at Last Light, just published last year. "I shall never forget that beach," wrote Corporal William Preston, who had come ashore at dawn in an amphibious tank. "Nor would he forget the one dead soldier in particular who caught his eye. I wonder about him," Preston added. "What were his plans never to be fulfilled? What fate brought him to that spot at that moment? Who was waiting for him at home?" Destiny had also sorted them, and would sort them again and again, until that hour for which they were born had passed. Thank you. Sarah, if we take 10 minutes for questions and begin the trek over to the library at 11:15, are we horribly off schedule?
We can do 10 minutes.
All right. So I'll take a few questions.
Yes, sir. Is there veracity to the idea that a colonel drops all the elements that bring at graduation?
No, what happens with the film is the photographer goes ashore on Omaha Beach, takes several rolls of film, jumps on the landing craft, gets back to England, and is really in a hurry because there's a packet plane heading for the United States. And he realizes if he gets the pictures back there and scoops all his competitors, that they're going to have the pictures of the landing like the day after the landing. This is going to be incredible. And so he hands the film to the darkroom operator and says, "Really important we get this done fast because the plane is about to leave." The darkroom operator turns up the heat in the ovens, trying to dry the pictures faster. In fact, ruins everyone except 12. And these pictures here that you see, like this one, there's only about 12 of those that survive. Those are the only pictorial record we have of the landings on Omaha Beach on D-Day itself. It would be amazing if what would have happened had the rest of them been developed. But in fact, they weren't. And some of them are blurry because it comes from not the camera wasn't shaking. It comes from the way that they were dried too fast. But that is that's why it sort of represented the confusion of the beach. And that's why the camera in Saving Private Ryan is shaking. It comes from those photographs and how they represented really the confusion that people felt landing under fire. Yes?
What about the videos? There, I think one of that was, they dropped in the sea, the video station.
Yeah, I don't know. No idea.
There's only a few seconds of video.
So, I don't know. In the side there.
Well, the government has been criticized by not taking the con in a timely manner. Is that a fair criticism?
Clearly, he wanted to take Con. I think it was probably beyond the reach of British forces. I think his ambitions exceeded his capabilities. Some of my colleagues might disagree with me, but very difficult to get the Con and take it by D-Day or even D-Day +6. Yeah, all right, in the back, in this direction.
Hi. In the movie Band of Brothers, Dick Winters is shown knocking out, and his group of soldiers is shown knocking out German 88s, I think. How significant was that to the landings, to the success of the landings?
That was actually not on D-Day itself, but it was, I think, the day after. As I recall, at any rate, those particular guns it was important. It wasn't crucial, but again, it was part of what led to victory. There's a statue of Dick Winters in Normandy now, but he said, "Hey, look, we were one small unit among many. If you're going to put a statue of me there, you better dedicate it to all the small unit leaders that fought Normandy." And indeed, it So you can go see it if you go to Normandy, in the yellow.
My father was stationed somewhat north, Newcastle on Tyne. Was there a plan to the way the troops were stationed before the invasion?
The troops came in from the United States and ended up on the west coast and the south coast of England, just because it's closer to the United States. Why is this significant? Because when the British troops then load up their ships, they're on the east side of the invasion force. Americans are on the west side. They land in Normandy, so they wouldn't have to crisscross. They land in Normandy that way. British on the east, Americans on the west. When they turn and liberate France, they also liberate it that way. British now in the north, Americans in the south. Why is that of significance? Because during the Cold War, when you got to occupation zones in Germany, the British are in the north, Americans are in the center of Germany. And all throughout the Cold War, just because of the way they landed in Normandy, which was because of the way they flowed overseas. If the Soviets had attacked West Germany, the major avenue of approach was in the north of Germany, hitting the least, perhaps the weaker member of the coalition, the British, instead of the Americans. All because of the Normandy invasion, how it echoed throughout the succeeding 40 years. Yes?
You mentioned that only 5 of the tanks reached the beaches in Omaha out of 35 or 36. Were you referring to the other seas?
No, I'm referring to the duplex drive tanks. They had canvas skirts that went up. They had propellers in the back. And then they would float, theoretically, and in a calm sea they would float, but these were 5-foot swells. And the waves would come in. Once you had enough water over the canvas skirts, blood, all the crews drowned. If you had more armor on Omaha Beach, it would have been pretty significant. Yes, wait.
The Navy commander also shipped it out to drop it even further out.
Right.
There were 2 Sherman tanks that came ashore with gas salty and easy red. They both were mobilized and provided stationary fire support for the infantry units of the 115 coming ashore at that draw.
Right. Easy Red Beach is the key beach because that's where all the reinforcements end up flowing through on D-Day.
Let me add one more small point, which is, I think, a very good point. There were 300 Amtraks that were sent over, which is the armored track vehicle that the Army and the Marines were using in the Pacific and Craiglang for the first time, which provided some support for crossing the beach. There were 300 which were shipped to Europe. Corlett mentioned that they paid no attention. They were not used until the Canadians used them against in the opening of the show. Those having been used at Omaha Beach would save a significant amount of American casualties and also would have provided fire support.
You just added to my arsenal, Bradley. The southern, the invasion in southern France, Operation Dragoon, is more successful because the commander, Lucien Truscott, is really competent. He listens to a lot of, well, I mean, he paid attention to the lessons of Normandy, obviously. He made a lot of other decisions. It's really a topic for a different lecture, but I've often asked, who is your favorite commander of World War II? Who do you think was the most competent American commander of World War II, at least in the European theater? And my answer is Lucien Truscott. Normally people say, who is he? No, he is super competent. There's a new biography out on him, by the way, in the front.
You say that the fighting in Omaha, everything went along, Utah, everything basically went away. How far away geographically were those two beaches? I was just wondering the successes that Utah broke out since the retrospect, but if they were geographically close, could some of the resources that landed successfully in Utah have been deployed more successfully in
No, they're miles apart, and it took several days for beaches to link up, so not possible.
Another question was, how many, to your point, how many miles apart from the extreme left to the extreme right are we talking about this overall invasion?
50, 60 miles. So it's a pretty big undertaking. I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. I will be over at the library at lunch. Before you're like my students, you all want to get up. Before you get up, those individuals who wish to attend the Thompson Library lunch, there's a lunch over there, but haven't paid. There are a limited number of tickets available at the door, and I think it's going to be in the very top room, right?
It's the second floor in the Buckeye Reading Room.
All right, in the Buckeye Reading Room, too bad. If you haven't been to the top of the library, though, ever, go to the top and look around. Magnificent views of the city and campus. If you wish to see the World War I and World War II displays, they are open to all attendees free of charge. It gives you an idea for the kinds of holdings we have in our library for our students' use in their research of World War I and World War II. And the library archivist, Jeffrey Smith, will be on hand to answer any questions that you might have about the collections. If you need help, Wick needs help getting to the library, you don't want to hobble across campus, in the loading dock behind this building, there will be a bus that will take everyone over to the library, and the bus will be available at the library to return you here afterwards. And if you have any other